The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We welcome back to this week's show a return guest, Pennsylvania Auditor General Tim DeFoor. Tim had actually been on the show in November of 2020, right after his election. It was historic. And we talked about what he expected and what his program would be as Auditor General. So now we have him back a little over 2 years later to actually talk about what he's seen in the office. Tim hails from Dauphin County in central Pennsylvania, although his roots extend to Ohio and West Virginia through his parents. Tim's educational background is diverse and extensive. He holds a degree in paralegal studies from Harrisburg Area Community College. He then went on to get his bachelor's degree in psychology from the Pennsylvania State University. And then he went on to earn additional degrees in sociology and history from the University of Pittsburgh. Not done, Tim went on to earn his master's degree in project management from Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. Tim started his career in public service as a special investigator with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Office of Inspector General, where he investigated government and contractor fraud, waste, and abuse within state government. From there, Tim went on to become a special agent with the Attorney General's Office of Pennsylvania, investigating Medicaid fraud and legal prescription drug diversion. Later, he became a fraud investigator and internal auditor for the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, also known as UPMC, as well as various federal contractors. Tim's elective public service began in 2015 when he was elected Dauphin County Controller. In 2020, as mentioned, Tim became the first African American or person of color to win an election for statewide office in Pennsylvania. He also became the first Republican elected Auditor General since Barbara Hafer in 1989. On this week's show, we will discuss his first 2+ years in office, his audits of school districts, and how they play fast and loose with regulations, resulting in higher property taxes for Pennsylvania residents. His fight to get subpoena power, important for his office, and he doesn't have it, and what he's doing to get it, as well as other issues that we will get into and delve into today.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Tim, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Chuck, it's good to be back. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for making the time for being on the show.
Chuck, it's absolutely my pleasure. And those 2 years went by pretty quickly. We've been busy here.
You probably had certain expectations coming into that office. You ran a campaign on policy initiatives and other things you would do as Auditor General. So the first question is, how has your expectations and what you thought you were going to be doing actually ended up with actually governing and doing it? So what did you think you would find in the office and the powers and the job, and what has it turned out to be when you actually were sworn in?
And you know what, Chuck, and that's a really good question, because as elected officials, we all have our own set of expectations of what we're going to do once we get in the office. But one of the things that I felt was extremely important for me to do was to meet with staff and find out from staff, what are your expectations? How do you view the department currently, but also how do you view what's your vision for this particular department? So what we did was we ended up meeting with through Zoom, because at that time some of the COVID restrictions were still in, and you could only have maybe 20 or 30 people on a Zoom call. So, and there were 350 people employed here with the department. So for the entire month of March, we had Zoom calls with the employees. And I told them a little bit about me and asked them to share a little bit of information about themselves. So based on some of the things that So my expectations, we kind of combine with some of the employees' expectations, and that's the groundwork and the foundation that we're currently laying for the department.
Having known and talked to Eugene D. Pasquale, of course, your predecessor, and having read on the subject matter, one of his big issues was staffing and funding. And he had pointed out that there were major cutbacks in that department, not through any fault of his or any other auditor general, but that, the legislature and governors looking for ways to apportion money in their budgets or meet budget goals. Your department has been pretty hard hit. So you talked about 350 employees. Is that an issue for you as well going forward?
Well, think about it this way. At one time, this department had over 1,000 employees.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So and now we're at a complement of about 350. Our budget is about $41 million. The state's budget is about $42 billion. So one of the things that we had to deal with was the size of our staff and was budgetary issues. So the first year, I'm not going to lie to you, was a bit tough. And the reason why it was tough is because we had those budgetary issues, but also we had a tremendous amount of people who were retiring. And that's an issue that had been going on across the Commonwealth. You have people who have 20, 30 years of service who just left state service, and at times the funding wasn't there to replace them, and they were retiring at a higher rate than we could replace. However, last year we after having conversations with the governor, conversations with the legislature, talking about our budget and some of the things that we wanted to do in this department, and talking about some of the things that we couldn't do in this department, our budget, we were giving it an increase, and that certainly did help. And I have to admit, we are in a much better place today than we were when I came into office.
You would think you will now have at least more resources from our new governor, Josh Shapiro, and I know he, as a former attorney general, understands the assets necessary to run a department of your size.
Absolutely, and we have been having negotiations and conversation with his staff. I've spoken to him prior to his swearing in, and hope to follow up with other conversations as well. It's kind of funny you mentioned this, because right now we're in the process of preparing for our budget hearings, which are going to be coming up very, very soon. And same with us as with other departments, there are going to be certain asks, but the asks that we have are asked just to pretty much maintain what we have.
In a rather historic decision, the Commonwealth Court of Pennsylvania just found that the existing formulas for apportioning state tax dollars into school districts is unconstitutional. It's not a fair formula. They haven't specifically said what would be fair. They haven't come up with their own plan, and they kind of left it to the governor and the legislature. I would assume information you've gathered, you're well aware that some school districts are just flat out, the wealthier ones seem to get a higher proportion of money, the ones that need it less, and the poorer ones seem to not get as much and they need it more. But what have you come across in your investigations over the last couple years? Have you found that to be the case?
Well, that as far as we definitely watched the court case, but we weren't. That doesn't necessarily impact how we do our job.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because one of the things that this department is responsible for, we look at after the funds have been spent. As you know, as well as some of your viewers know, that whenever you're dealing with any type of state funding, federal funding, or it could be government funding, period, they all have strings attached to them, stating that these funds are to be spent in a certain way. It is then our responsibility to assure that in fact did happen, and we do that by performing audits. So although the court decision happened the way that it happened, it doesn't impact how we do our job here in the Department of the Auditor General.
Right. Well, in answer to that question, I said we get into school districts. You've referred in some of your audits and investigations back to the enforcement powers you have relative to making sure monies that are earmarked for a certain thing are in fact, you have found in a number of school districts that they're playing fast and loose with how that is being applied. You, I think, made reference to a shell game and putting the money into something and then raising property taxes out the back door. So can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, so what we did an audit, a performance audit of 12 school districts. And the audit was to look at whether or not school districts were properly using a referendum exemption from the Department of Education, which allows you to raise taxes in case of emergency, allows you to raise taxes without putting that out to the taxpayer. So you apply for this referendum, send it to the Department of Education.
Right.
The Department of Education looks at the information that you send and determines whether or not you can raise taxes. And one of the things that we looked at is whether or not school districts were properly using that referendum, what the Department of Education was doing when they were approving these, and whether or not school districts were properly using their general funds the way that they're actually intended. And what I mean by that is, were they moving funds from their general fund account to other areas to make it seem as though they had less money in the general fund than they actually did, so they could then get these emergency exemptions from the Department of State. And normally these emergency exemptions are used for things like special education and also for pension obligations.
Right.
So that's what our audit entailed. And we determined that this is something that in fact was occurring.
Well, again, I know, you're speaking to 3.5 or 4 million taxpayers in this media market, Northeast and Central PA. And one of the biggest complaints they have is their ever escalating property taxes, which of course is a main source of local funding for the area school district. And so I'm sure they're very interested in what you just had to say, because they're being affected by it, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that, and although this wasn't in our audit report, one of the things to consider is last year, there were $16 billion that were given to school districts across the Commonwealth for property tax, based from property taxes. 30% of that was paid by people 65 or over.
Oh.
People on a fixed income. So so when you take a look at that, you have to, when you raise property taxes and when you raise taxes without putting it out to the voters, you have to keep in mind the people who are then going to be paying that. People like your senior citizens, right. People on fixed incomes. You may have a family who's just starting out, right. And they're writing a check when they don't necessarily have to.
Right. Tim, we are going to take a break for some of our messages, and so this will be a break. But when I come back, we have a bunch of areas to cover. One of them is that the issue of subpoena power, which your office does not have. The Pennsylvania Treasurer has subpoena power. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania has subpoena power. And shockingly to me, the Auditor General of Pennsylvania, who does the most audits and investigations, does not. So I'd like you to point out some of the issues that you face with that. Obviously, you need legislation, and you've had meetings with legislators already to get that done. So we'll talk about that. And then the second thing when we come back is to have you expound and educate me as well. Because when we talked off camera, financial literacy was not a term of art that I had ever heard. And it makes all the sense in the world. That's a great mission you've undertaken as Auditor General of Pennsylvania to do that. So again, we have a couple of important areas to get to, and we'll be back after this message. After an intense investigation into the leak of a draft of the famous Dodd decision, the U.S. Supreme Court recently announced it was unable to flush out the person or persons responsible for that leak. In making that announcement, the Supreme Court unequivocally rejected any conclusions that the document, which subsequently overturned the nearly 50-year-old Roe v. Wade abortion decision, was obtained through any hacks of the court's computer network. The investigation included interviews with court personnel whose cell phones and private emails were searched, as well as their financial court records. According to the court's findings, some of those interviewed admitted to telling spouses or significant others about the draft. That's probably where the leak occurred. The whole scenario surrounding the leak played out like a John Grisham novel and conjured up many shadows of Watergate, the 1970s scandal that toppled the presidency of Richard M. Nixon. Unlike the court leak, information on Watergate's exposure was attributed to Deep Throat, who later turned out to be a deputy director of the FBI. Chief Justice John Roberts was correct in calling the leak, quote, a singular and egregious breach on the court. And even though the court has stated it was unable to find out who was responsible, the investigation into the matter is not concluded. The court's approval rating took a hit following the announcement of the leak, according to a poll conducted by Marquette. According to the most recent poll, the court's approval rating bounced back this January. The court's report made no mention as to whether or not the spouses or significant others were interviewed as part of the investigation. But we all know that loose lips sink ships. The court would go far in the form of public opinion by finding the source of the leak and permanently plugging it. Auditor General DeFoor, we're welcoming you back for this part two of our show, the second half, I should say. And as I telegraphed before we went to break, let's talk about the fact that the Auditor General does not have subpoena power and why you should, and what the processes will be for you to get it. So take it from there.
Yeah, and surprisingly enough, you're correct. The Auditor General does not have subpoena power. The state treasurer, in a somewhat limited basis, but they have it, they have subpoena power. Of course, the Attorney General, where I was once a special agent, of course they have it. Your county controllers, they have subpoena power. However, this department does not have subpoena power. And so whenever we do our audits, we're basically doing our audits with one hand tied behind our back, and here's why. We could be performing an audit, and we perform audits of state departments. We perform audits of agencies and organizations that are funded by taxpayer dollars. If there is documentation that these entities don't want us to have, they basically can thumb their nose up at us and say, you're not getting them. And we really don't have any recourse. And this is something that happened with my predecessor, Eugene T. Pasquale, where he was asked to perform an audit. He was asked. And when he started performing the audit, there were certain documentations that were needed. He didn't get those documents. Finally, after going round and round about it, and finally they ended up getting the documents. However, those documents, the information that they really needed in those documents was redacted. So basically it was useless information, and you can't perform an audit with useless information. That doesn't make it a quality audit report. And we're about providing and giving the general public quality audit reports with all the information that is available to us. And if we don't have subpoena power, then that can be taken away. And so I was quite shocked to learn that once I did become Auditor General, that we did not have subpoena power.
You've already had meetings with legislative leaders. Could you update us on the prospects of getting that legislation done? I've got to believe with the former Attorney General now sitting in the governor's office, that he would understand the importance of that subpoena power. So I'm sure you'll have an ally in Josh Shapiro. Just a matter of getting it done legislatively.
And everybody that we've talked to understands the importance of getting subpoena power. However, we've been having these discussions for 3 years. And 3 years. A little over two. I've only been in office for for 2 years. So I apologize for 2 years. We've been having that discussion since we've been in office,
Right.
and nothing's happened. So, however, I remain optimistic that it's something that is going to happen, and I believe that it will, even though it may be on a limited basis and in reference to certain types of audits we perform. I mean, limited basis is better than none at all. So I remain hopeful, optimistic that it is going to happen. However, it's not something that has happened yet.
Well, I can envision, remembering this is a political show, I can envision scenarios where elected officials, House of Representative members as well as senators, will have a lot of feedback from some of these local governmental entities and authorities that are under your jurisdiction that receive state funding that wouldn't be particularly interested in having subpoena power, right? That's just how it works.
Right, exactly, and that's a true statement. However, we're here to perform a certain function, and that is to audit the debtors to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And without subpoena power, we can't do that the way that it is supposed to be done. Now, you hope you get to a point where you never have to use subpoena power. And when I was Dauphin County Controller, we never used it. We never did. And hopefully, even though we do get it, hopefully that's something that's never going to happen. But until then, it's a tool. It's a tool that we're going to need in order for us to perform our functions, because there was an audit, again, by my predecessor, where subpoena power was in fact needed, and they didn't have it. And because they didn't have it, they weren't able to fulfill their obligation and to complete a quality audit report.
I've done views in Pennsylvania where money that is supposed to go for the highway funds gets redirected to the Pennsylvania State Police because of their accepting enforcement obligations on a lot of rural boroughs and townships and villages in Pennsylvania that don't have a police force. So it falls to the Pennsylvania State Police to police those areas. Well, there have been numerous discussions of a proposal because basically the issues of fairness. One, they're taking monies that could go to infrastructure to actually fund the overtime and the fees the police is charging the state police for doing it. And I want to say there's close to 3,000 governmental subdivisions in Pennsylvania, and only maybe a little more than half actually have police forces. That means half of those jurisdictions do not have a police force and effectively are sucking up off the backs of taxpayers and get their police services for free. And that's one issue of where politics, even though it's financially sound and should get done, it's not. And then another area kind of related to that, there are many areas, if they would regionalize their police forces, they would save all kinds of money. But that never happens because each police jurisdiction has police chiefs and have appointment powers from elected commissioners or mayors or borough managers. And they don't want to give up that power of selecting police officers. So politics in this great country of ours, nonetheless, has a way of infiltrating things. That's why our taxes are as high as they are and some of that stuff. So your point is well taken about something that would be efficient and necessary for you doesn't get done. Politics may have a lot to do with it.
Well, you know what? And it's all about transparency. I mean, when you hear some talk about transparency, it's a political talking point. Well, it's my reality. This is what we do. We assure that state government is transparent about what they do. Not only the state government, whoever receives state funding, we assure that they are transparent and accountable to the people of this Commonwealth. That's my duties and responsibility.
Talk a little about, as I indicated before break, financial literacy. Now, I'm going to plead guilty right up front that I had never heard the term before. I like to consider myself somewhat well-read and knowledgeable, and I was clueless about it. So I'm sure a lot of other people are. So on this show, hopefully you're going to talk about it and people will understand, even at the grade school level of getting involved. So That's your baby. Talk about it. It's important.
Yeah. So in November of 2021, we kicked off our Be Money Smart financial literacy awareness program. And what that is, it's to bring awareness to financial literacy and the importance of financial literacy, not only from kindergarten through 12th grade, but also in adults. When you look at some of our audit reports and some of the findings that we have, they're findings because some people just don't understand finances. They don't understand accounting. But also, with that being said, it's important to prepare the next generation. Next generation, kindergarten through 12th grade. And because they're going to be the ones who are going to be start our businesses. They're going to be the ones who are going to lead businesses, and they're going to be the ones setting up our financial future for the next several decades, if not the next century. So as we felt it was important to work with other organizations, to work with WISE across the state, to work with credit unions across the state who also have an interest in financial literacy, to where we're talking about financial literacy, we're bringing awareness to all these different programs about financial literacy and the importance of financial literacy. There's 20 states in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that teach financial literacy. Pennsylvania is not one of them. Hopefully one day we would like to see that change because we understand the importance of it. Because eventually kids who are now in school, when they go to college, if they have a student loan, they need to understand what they're getting into.
Right.
But also those who are going to be starting their own businesses also need to know how to balance a checkbook, need to know what it's like to save for an emergency, understand credit. You're going to want to eventually buy a car. You may want to eventually buy a house. So you need to understand all that, because by teaching financial literacy and kids learning it, it's going to make them a smarter consumer when they become adults.
Well, it also has collateral effects that are important. Less people will be on public assistance or welfare. Less people will find themselves in a poverty situation. I think we're the 5th largest state, Tim, and it's shocking to me that almost half the states in this great country of ours have financial literacy programs, and one of the largest states, both by population and geography, energy production, every form of measurement is Pennsylvania, a swing state in presidential elections, no less, doesn't have it. That's an amazing thing for me.
It is, and we hope to change that, because this is, as far as we've crisscrossed the state talking about it, the outpour has been extremely positive. I mean, extremely positive. And that's why we do what we do. And hopefully one day it'll be taught in every school in Pennsylvania, from kindergarten through 12th grade, because it is something that is extremely important. And as I said earlier, it's about preparing the next generation. But not only that, it's also a life skill, a skill that you're going to need in order to live.
Right. Well, ironically, you talked about how important it is in grade school. Look, in law schools and in medical schools, they should probably have a course in it. How many lawyers graduated from my class, 2/3, that didn't have an immediate job and had to hang a shingle, had no idea how to handle a budget for a business, how to meet payroll, pay Social Security tax on top for employees, all of those things, and all of the business decisions that go in financial literacy, even to postgraduate work, would matter, I would say, to everybody, could learn.
So it's about understanding the basics of personal finance.
Well put.
That's what it's.
Again, Auditor General of Pennsylvania, Tim DeFoor, thank you so much. I would say, from my perspective, your high and lofty goals and ambitions when you sat in this show as Auditor General-elect have been met full force, and you're a credit to what we're doing here in Pennsylvania. So thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having me.